Burke's on his feet. He looks up and gives me a grin and says, "Hey dude, you too must be from Marin." Marin County's A-OK, from Tam to Stinson all the way to MA. Fresh organic veggies in the market every day. Lieutenant Dylan and NW.
Welcome to the Run TMC podcast. That is the Run the Marin County podcast, a podcast about basketball in Marin County. I'm Duffy Ballard, and with me this morning is coach and friend and commentator and someone who looks really sharp for it being 7:30 in the morning, David Levine. Good morning, Dave.
Always looking sharp. Good morning, Duff. Nice to see you. Hope you had a great Father's Day. Happy Father's Day to all the listeners out there. And this is an awesome episode today, a great opportunity for us to branch out beyond the friendly confines of Marin and speak to someone who has had a huge impact on basketball globally.
Right. And I think it's fair to say, Dave, and we get into this, but I think it's fair to say that if our guest on this podcast had not started his own podcast back in 2014, we would not be podcasting because he was an inspiration to us. He has helped us as coaches. He has helped us as podcasters, and he has helped to share the game around the world.
Yeah, Chris Oliver is our guest. We'll get to him. We have a few things we wanted to hit on before we get to the interview, but Chris did truly change the complexion of how basketball is discussed and shared amongst coaches and players. Just a really incredible entrepreneur. In addition to, obviously, we talk about it, he coached at the college level as an assistant or a head coach for over 20 years, but just completely a true innovator in terms of creating this basketball podcast. And now there are, you kick a rock and you find 75 different podcasts like ours. Obviously ours is wonderful, but Chris was really kind of the first guy to do it and continues to be one of the best out there. 350 plus episodes. I listened to it religiously and I just couldn't believe that we had the opportunity to sit down with him. What a great guy.
Yeah, and before we go any further, Dave, public service announcement here. I wouldn't recommend kicking rocks around. I mean, maybe if you got some sturdy shoes, that's cool. But if you're a kid out there, go out there and shoot the rock. Don't kick the rock. We're trying to keep things really basic here, Dave. Before we go any further, how about a shout out to our platinum sponsor, Encore Custom. Encore is a sportswear design house and manufacturer of customized team uniforms and lifestyle apparel. You can find them at www.encorecustom.com. That's www.encorecustom.com or in downtown San Rafael on 4th Street. Go in and take a look at their studio. Thank you, Encore Custom. And Dave, before we get into this discussion, there was some big news in the NBA yesterday. It's not the finals. We're not going to go into the finals, but we are going to talk about briefly this trade, which might reshape the Eastern Conference for next year. What do you think?
Yeah, and just taking a step back, the idea of taking a big bet as a GM, this was a big bet. So the Magic traded for Desmond Bane. The Magic in Memphis made a trade. And Desmond Bane's a really good player. As Warrior fans, we all know Desmond Bane. He kills us. He seems to always go for 25 or 30 against us. Really strong guard, good shooter, great penetrator, just solid player. But Duffy, the Magic gave up a lot to get Desmond Bane.
Did, yeah.
I mean, if you had told me without knowing who they traded for, so they traded Kentavious Caldwell-Pope and Cole Anthony, two solid pros, and then they traded 4 future first-round picks and an additional pick swap. So Memphis has the option to do a pick swap in the first round if they want to. So that's 4 first rounders and a pick swap plus 2 players. And if you told me that, I would think, okay, they're getting Giannis or somebody, perennial all-star. And they got Desmond Bane, who's really good. Again, I'm not speaking ill of Desmond Bane, but that just seemed like quite a big swing for the Magic. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of Bane. I mean, he can score in a bunch of different ways. He can be electrifying shooter. It doesn't need much space to get a shot off. He really could help them quite a bit, but I do think they're giving up a couple of glue guys who, in Anthony and Caldwell Pope, who kind of, wherever they're playing, they're going to make guys around them better. And it can be a little hard. You don't know in the moment what you're giving up with guys like those two that are maybe not like filling up the stat sheet, but they're filling up the balance of your team. And it remains to be seen, whether Bane can fit in that way. I'm guessing he probably can. And then it remains to be seen, how much mortgaging your future is going to prevent the Magic from taking that next step they'll probably have to take beyond this trade to make it to the elite of the Eastern Conference. So, we'll see. And then just furthermore, like, the Pacers have shown that you can make it to the NBA Finals and maybe win the NBA Finals with a team of guys who, none of them like were top 5 draft choices, I don't think. And they just fit together really well and have a lot of different pieces who complement each other. And maybe that starts to change how teams are developed a little bit in the league, such a superstar heavy approach for so many teams. And, maybe that's not the only way to get the title.
It's a great point. I was going to mention a similar thing that, the superstar, building around superstars, is you're seeing that change before our very eyes, right? And the Pacers are a perfect example of this. And so maybe Orlando's view is, look, we've got a really good, solid crew of players, Wagner. I mean, they've got a bunch of young, Paolo, they're loaded with young talent already. So maybe they think Bane is just the perfect fit, and they don't really need these draft picks because they're probably set from a roster perspective for the next couple years. So, fair enough. I mean, we talk sometimes about some of these episodes are very timely and of the moment, like when we talk about, high school playoffs or things that are going on. This is an episode with Chris Oliver that we hope is timeless and that people in 10 years can come back and listen to this. So in 10 years, if you're listening to this and Desmond Bane is now in the NBA top 50 of all time, you can say, well, Dave, maybe you were wrong. Maybe this was the right move for them to make this trade. So we'll see.
Dave, and that would be a first. That would be a first, but it will happen eventually. Time on planet eventually gets to you one way or another.
Well, I'm at least going to stop kicking rocks because apparently my medical professional friend tells me that's not a good idea. So
you're welcome.
Okay.
One note on Cole Anthony. So Cole Anthony probably is the only NBA player in history to be called putrid, quote unquote, putrid by his own father when the father was doing a broadcast of a game. I guess there's a sequence in which Cole Anthony got dunked on and then missed a shot on the other end. And that dad, Greg Anthony, great player in his own right for UNLV, and then New York Knicks, called him putrid. And I mentioned that in part, Dave, because we're doing a little segue here, is we want to do a quick endorsement of a new podcast. I'm going to tell you, Dave, that our podcast keeps spawning, success stories. So a new podcast from friend of the podcast and guest from season 2, episode 10, Thad Levine. It's called Rosters to Rings, and it talks very much about this inside calculation about how you build that roster to get to the ring. It's very self-explanatory, Dave. But anyway, they just started up a new podcast, Thad and Ryan McDonough, who is a former NBA GM with the Suns, and Greg Anthony was one of their first guests. It's a great episode to listen to if you want to check out the Rosters to Rings podcast, Dave. But I know you haven't gotten there just yet, but you will. You will. I'm sure of it.
Indeed. Well, first of all, no relation. Thad Levine, not related to me. Don't know him. Now I do, and now he's a friend, but I didn't know him before we did this podcast. He's an old friend of Duffy's. Thad was fantastic. He was the GM of the Minnesota Twins for many years. He's had a career as a front office executive in Major League Baseball. Has an amazing voice. Like he should be on the radio. So I'm glad he's doing a podcast because as we were speaking with him, I was thinking, man, this guy needs to be in media. Mm-hmm. Just the dulcet tones of his voice, wonderful and really insightful, smart, thoughtful guy. So this podcast sounds great. I love the idea of having 2 former GMs just tell war stories because we all, as we talked about with Thad, as kids, a lot of us dreamed of being a GM. It's like you think of it as it's like having your own, fantasy baseball, fantasy basketball team, fantasy football team. And to some degree, that's true. Probably, as Thad would say, that's like 3% of the job. but the rest of the job is different. It's really hard. It's a lot of people management and building culture and negotiating, and so I'm really intrigued to hear Ryan and Thad talk about kind of the behind the scenes of being a GM.
Yeah. And, Thad is a baseball guy. And when he was on our podcast, there was quite a bit of baseball talk. Just for those listeners tuning in, maybe for the first time to this podcast, this is a basketball podcast, but we don't restrict ourselves. We like unstructured, commentary. And so we will bring on any sort of guest who has some perspective that might translate to sport, or more specifically, the sport of basketball. And Thad, he was a great guest, and his story about how he became a general manager in the sport of baseball is a very fascinating tale that probably can resonate with a lot of young people out there who might want to get into the business side of sport. So anyway, Dave, we are going to kick off our interview very soon, but we do have a glossary term from both of us, and it's appropriate for this episode, and we're going to riff on it a little bit. So the glossary term today is constraint, and not constraint in the more global aspect, but constraint in teaching the sport of basketball.
Yep, we discuss it all the time. Coaches love to use, constraints in practice. Really, all a constraint is it's a limitation that you're imposing on your players so that they can learn how to react and deal with adversity in a game. So a very typical constraint that coaches will use is, okay, we're going to play 3-on-3, but you can't dribble. So you have to pass, cut, pass, screen away. And, the younger players will often struggle with that initially because younger players, all they want to do is pass and then go set a screen on the ball. Well, now you got to have space away from the ball, and ball needs to have some energy. So that's an example of a constraint. You could have a constraint where the only time the offense can shoot, they have to get a swing from one side of the court to the other, or they have to set an on-ball pick and roll before an action goes, right? There are a multitude of constraints you can use. It's a great way to teach the game and to drill certain concepts. If your team is not doing something or executing something well, using constraints in practice can really help.
Yeah, and the reason we picked this is because constraints, it's a big part of the vocabulary that Chris Oliver has been using to teach the game with Basketball Immersion. And a lot of constraint-based teaching we do sort of naturally, but to actually think about it and describe it is helpful. And there are a lot of different ways, as you say, Dave. You can use space constraints. You can kind of cut the floor in half and only have team play on the left side. There are number constraints where you throw an additional guy on the defense and really make the offense work, or have the defense double every time on the ball. There are scoring system manipulation constraints. We did this last year a bunch in practice, where we had these games where a right-hand layup was worth 5, all right, and an open 3 was worth 4, even if you missed it. And these were misses. So it was really trying to teach the defense to force to the weak hand. And then you can scale the equipment. That's another type of constraint. So younger kids, when they're learning to shoot, they should probably be on a 8-foot rim, 8.5, so that they don't have to heave it up there. So that's just yet another constraint. And it's really about setting up a situation that, as you say, Dave, allows a player, no matter their age, or a player or a team, to learn and to get to a goal that you may have for them, but you haven't told them exactly how to get there, and they're kind of figuring it out. And an analogy that Chris uses in our interview, which I think was great, was like, if you're teaching your kid to load the dishwasher, are you going to tell them exactly where everything goes? Or are you going to let them, try it out and see how it goes? And, they're probably going to screw it up the first 1, 2, 3, 4 times, but eventually they'll figure out their own approach, and then you can guide them. And eventually you got some clean dishes out of it all, Dave.
Yep, absolutely. We use it all the time, and Chris Oliver has been at the forefront of this movement, and we talk about it in the interview. So, we've got summer right now. We're all working with our respective teams here in the month of June. We've got practice this week. I know that we're going to have some small-sided games that we're working on with constraints to get our kids, sharing the ball, moving, attacking, whatever we want them to work on. So using constraints is a really effective coaching tool. So thank you, Chris Oliver, for enlightening all of us on this topic.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris is also just a big fan of like unstructured play more broadly. And we get into that in the interview. But that's something that you and I have talked about a lot, Dave. And now we are in the summer. So if you are, a young player out here, I know there's summer leagues and the club season's still going, but this is a great time of year to go out and play some pickup. I played yesterday with Holden. It was on Father's Day. There were 5 of us where it was a dad-son combination out there. And like you can see, every dad is a little bit different, in their approach with their son, and every son's a little different with their approach with the dad. But just out there playing ball in a type of setting that you don't, there's no officials, there's no coach. You're kind of trying to figure things out a little bit on your own. And it's just, a really cool thing about the sport of basketball.
Agreed. Well, I think we should get to the interview with Coach Oliver. First of all, if you want to check him out online, there are a lot of places you can find him, but Basketball Immersion, www.basketballimmersion.com is a great place to start. That's his website. His podcast is called the Basketball Podcast. You can find it on any platform where you find us. Again, 350 plus episodes. Every single one is useful. And it's not just breaking down X's and O's and nerding out on different offensive actions or defensive sets. It's leadership, it's culture, it's the philosophy of coaching. He's really thoughtful about having guests talk about the kind of the soft side of coaching, which is so critical. And then this discussion was wide-ranging and really fun. I hope it's useful to our coaches out there, but really players, parents, everybody who listens to us, I think we'll get something out of this discussion because Chris he's a sponge. He loves the game. And then he also loves to share the game. I mean, you think about it, we have a very niche-y little podcast here in Marin. Chris has a global reach and business. He's working with the NBA and teaching the game and speaking at clinics globally. He did not have to come on our little podcast, and he did because he just wants to help share the game, and he's a good human. And so, people can say everything they want, but it's their actions that matter. And he took the time to sit down with us, and I'm just really appreciative of that. And kudos to you, Duff, for reaching out to him and getting him to do it.
Yeah, really generous with his time. And one more sort of thanks to Chris before we get to the interview. It was initially his interview with David Hollander, author of How Basketball Can Save the World, that got me tuned in to Professor Hollander's work, and then we reached out to him, and he was on our podcast. And so, anyway, he's just had a very broad and wide-ranging impact on me as a coach and now as a podcaster. So, thank you, Chris, and we wish you the best of luck. And we're happy to come on your podcast anytime you need a couple dingy assistant coaches from Marin County. So
yeah, I think the bottom of the barrel is where he will find us for podcast guests. He's got many other people he should have.
Episode anyway, 35,000.
Yeah,
Ballard
exactly.
and Levine.
Exactly. All right, Duff. Good to see you. Have a good week. Coach Oliver, thank you so much. Everybody enjoy the podcast. And then we got some great ones coming up. So stay tuned.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Run TMC fam. It's Dave here. Before we get into this awesome interview with Coach Chris Oliver, I wanted to highlight that Coach Oliver has graciously offered to give our listeners a promo code for Basketball Immersion. So if you go to www.basketballimmersion.com/contact and fill out that information, and in the notes, just put that you're a listener of the Run TMC podcast, Coach Oliver will send you a promo code for access to the Basketball Immersion content, which is fantastic. Can't thank Coach Oliver enough for doing this. We'll also put this in the show notes. Enjoy the conversation. Thanks. All right. We are going. Chris Oliver, can't believe we have you on our podcast. Thank you for joining us.
Hey guys, great to be here. Great to be able to share with you, Duff and Dave, and excited to talk basketball and share the game with you guys.
Awesome. So listeners, we're extremely honored to have Chris Oliver. So Chris, I'll do a quick background on you, and then I want to get right into it. But so first of all, native of Ontario, a proud Canadian, McMaster University grad, has coached at the college level for, you coached how many years, Chris? 20 plus years
17 years as a head coach, but over 23 years total in college. Yeah.
Okay. And then you've probably heard of him, fans. If you haven't, in 2018, Chris, you started Basketball Immersion?
2014, technically. Yeah, it even goes back farther. But I would say mainstream wise, you're probably closer to 2018 where it became a little popular.
Okay. So started this business, Basketball Immersion. You can Google it. And I first caught wind of Chris probably 5-6 years ago. Hands down, the best basketball podcast in existence. Has had a huge impact. Run TMC, this business, our podcast would not exist without Chris. I frankly probably wouldn't even be a coach still without Chris and what he's done. 375 episodes of his podcast. It's a regular one for me. He's had just an incredible list of guests from players, coaches, people talking about the philosophy of the game, strategies, leadership, just so many great things I've learned from your podcast, Chris. Thank you for all that you've done for all of us coaches out there.
Well, thank you for saying that. And yeah, honestly, when I started this 2014, I just didn't realize that some of the ideas I was sharing were not mainstream. So I just said, well, this online thing's working for people. So let's try sharing online. And, it became this, which is 10 plus years later, talking to you guys about basketball and, working with the NBA and Nike in the elite space and just things that have evolved. It's absolutely incredible. But thanks to you and so many of your listeners that have supported the brand and the podcast and the different things that have led to this conversation.
Yeah, awesome. Well, what I like about your show, Chris, is it's a great mix of, you can get really in the weeds on, ball screen actions and defensive coverages and the X's and O's. And there are certain episodes where we nerd out, and Duff and I and our listeners love that. But then you also talk about, motivation, leadership, teamwork, dealing with adversity, some of the softer issues, which as a coach, we all know we all love to talk about the X's and O's, but it's the other stuff that's equally, if not more important.
So for me, you absolutely nailed it. It's like, we get it. No matter what I post on Twitter, the great play will get more likes than me or someone else talking about how to teach the game better. That's just the reality of coaching and the way coaches kind of consume the game. But definitely, like, starting from things like psychological safety, aftercare for athletes, we all like broad spectrum culture and all that stuff. But like, I'm talking about more the detail of how do you have a mini conversation with someone? How do you notice and normalize things for a player? These more specific things, and trying to, as you said, get into the weeds of more depth of how coaches do it. And for me, I didn't want to have a podcast where it's just something we could Google. I wanted to have a podcast where we can dive deep and get insights that normally we wouldn't get. And certainly if you or I were counting on a media member to ask these type of questions, they would never ask these questions. And that's really where the podcast came from.
So with that said, that's great. You've had this almost insane number of guests and so much knowledge that's been shared with you. Are there when we think about kind of teaching the game, and it can be the same or different depending on the level that you're coaching, right? We have people listening who are parents of 6th and 7th graders who are trying to understand what's the best way for their kid to learn the game and grow. And then you have high school players, college players. Are there recurring themes that echo as you're talking to guests about the best way to teach the game, the lessons teaching the game? Like, I'm curious about that.
So for me, there's a little bit of inherent bias because of the way that I approach the game and the way I teach the game, for sure. But I do think across the board, for the podcast, like over 300 episodes, it's now, I think, a recurring theme that people are appreciating the fact that kids are learning differently nowadays. I'm 52. When I learned the game, it was literally I had to go to a basketball camp or I had to go somewhere and learn skills or techniques because I wasn't going to learn them online. There was no online. So nowadays, kids have trainers, they have online, they have an incredible amount of structured basketball, structured by adults. So my message to coaches and parents all the time is, how can you create some informal or unstructured opportunities for your son or daughter to be able to explore the game? Because we had those opportunities. We played pickup. Well, we bemoan the fact that kids don't play pickup. Well, they don't play pickup because adults organize everything for kids. If it's not a 5-on-5 game with referees at a tournament on a weekend, then it's not real basketball, according to many parents at the youth level. And I would just caution parents to think differently and say that, no, you don't need all of that. You don't need more games. You need more development experiences where a player is psychologically safe and they can explore possibilities without the pressure of the game, without the pressure of trying to win a trophy when you're 10. None of that matters. I don't remember any of my daughter's tournament victories, but
Right.
I do follow the progression of nonlinear development for them, where I understand that at different phases of their development, they will be good at certain things. Now, I don't know which things, I don't know how they'll evolve, but if we create space for those things to evolve and not try and force them and just put them in situations where they can explore possibilities, they're more likely to be a more creative, confident player and a more effective player.
That's a great point, Coach. I totally agree. And a follow-up question for you. As a coach, how do you encourage that? And as a parent, how do you encourage that? And it sounds like one of the ways you can encourage it is just creating the situation. So just sending the kids out to play pickup ball like an old man game or whatever it might be.
Well, we can create those situations in practice with some of my youth teams that I've been around. They start with unstructured, informal, self-organized basketball. So as soon as they get in the gym, if there's one player there, if Duff's there, he's shooting by himself. But as soon as Dave comes in, they're playing one-on-one. As soon as Chris comes in, now we're playing 2-on-1, 1-on-2. And then we build up all the way. Sometimes it's 6-on-6. It doesn't matter. Coaches aren't involved. The coaches aren't coaching. Players are playing and they're figuring out things. And all those things that kind of we learned through playing pickup, dealing with consequences, dealing with winning and losing, dealing with struggle, dealing with mistakes, coping strategies, conflict resolution, all those different things. It's all handled by the players. And that's just a 10-minute segment. So that doesn't obviously fill the gap completely, but at least it gives them a chance to be able to explore. The other thing is if you're working with your son or daughter, outside or at the park or something like that, another way to do it is instead of tell them what to do, give them possibilities or give them problems to solve. Hey, how many different directions can you take a dribble between your legs and shoot the ball? And just give them a possibility or a solution to try and solve rather than tell them explicitly what to do. And the simplest way for all of us as basketball coaches, I have 3 E's that kind of explain this. My number one thing for the first E is to create an environment. I want to create a learning environment. I don't want to create a basketball environment. I want to create a learning environment. So we're going to talk learning language, all these different things, but they are learners. They're not basketball players. They're learners. So I want to make sure that they have a safe space to be able to learn and explore. The second E is exploration, which I've talked about, which is literally instead of giving them the answer right away, I let them explore. So I put them in a small-sided game. Let's say it's an advantage small-sided game. Dave's on my hip. I have the ball on a live dribble. Duff's in help, and there's 2 players on the weak side, so it's 3-on-2 advantage. I start live attack, and then we play out of it. I want to teach that drill with as few words as possible and get them in the drill as fast as possible, and then let them explore the drill. Then I can bring them back and account for the 30, which is explicit instruction. So if you want to think of it this way, environment, exploration, explicit instruction, traditionally coaches and parents are just as bad at this. They start with explicit instruction. Look, instead of you trying to figure out how to load the dishwasher, I'm going to tell you how to load the dishwasher. Well, wait a minute. How come we're taking away a really important step of learning, which is them figuring things out on their own, which helps them lead to more permanence and obviously helps lead to retention and retrieval practice and these different things that are leading to permanence in the learning phase.
I mean, that's such great stuff. And I've learned this from you because my tendency, I like to talk, as Duffy will bemoan the fact. My tendency is I often coach a lot in practice, and I will catch myself, and I'll think of you, Chris, and I'll think, man, I'm talking a lot. They need to play and figure this out, and that's sometimes hard for coaches to reconcile because if they're doing something, I do that advantage drill that you're talking about. If they're not rotating correctly, or if we're leaving the ball open. You want to correct it, but how do you do that kind of on the fly without bogging down the practice? I find that's a challenge.
Yeah, it's such a common challenge. And let's go deeper then. So for me, it's not the absence of coaching. It's just we're changing the way the coaching happens. Like, again, if you want to think about it this way, let them play, then coach it. Because they will help you understand what you need to coach more. And I think as coaches, we traditionally have these great plans. Well, this practice plan, this weekly plan, this season plan, all that stuff. And it's like, we have predetermined what they need to learn and when they need to learn it. But that does not account for the fact that some of them might not need what we're going to teach them, but we're going to teach it anyways because it's on my plan. No. So let them explore it and then teach it. So how do you actually teach it, Dave, on the fly? I would say hold. Some people say freeze. Some people use a whistle. Hold. So they're playing live basketball. And by the way, this all comes back to play more basketball.
Right.
Coaches, parents, just have your kids play more basketball.
Yep.
Less on-air drills, meaning without defense, and play more basketball. So they're playing basketball. Hold means hold the situation. Stop where you are. Recreate means go back. We'll recreate the situation where I want them to see the possibilities. I'll usually ask a question. Hey, what did you see here? What was your thought process here? What's another possibility here? Or I can give them very explicit instruction, which is, hey, you should have done this. And then follow that feedback with action where they get to play out of the situation. Quickly, why? Why am I doing this? Well, I'm doing this because it connects perception and decisions for them. It helps them see the context of the information that we're giving them. Instead of giving them information later, I'm giving them information in the context in which the mistake or the thing that we want to shape needs to be shaped. And then we let them play out of that. What do players want to, has a player ever left your practices saying, oh, I wish we didn't play so much basketball today? Right? Like nobody says that.
Yeah.
So we want to play basketball. We want to give them what they want, but then we're going to coach it while they do it. And that's the agreement. This isn't just like the last 5 minutes of practice. You get to scrimmage and I'm not going to stop it. This is, we're playing basketball the whole practice and I'm coaching it while they're playing.
Yeah. That's great. Go ahead, Duff.
Yeah, Coach. So, having listened to you for years now, Dave and I both appreciate that you are a basketball nerd in many ways, but in particular in the vocabulary of teaching. And so you use some phrases over and over again. Constraints is one. And, obviously Dave and I have incorporated constraints into our practices for years. But another one that I really like, and I wanted to ask you about teaching this, is scanning. And I feel like a lot of players I coach these days, they catch the ball and the ball's on the floor immediately, or they're attacking and they don't even put their eyes on the rim if they're in the half court before they attack. How do you teach scanning?
Okay, so if we want to think about it like real simply, scanning is the ability to be able to perceive things, right? Before you make decisions, you're perceiving things. So I'm dribbling the ball, Duff is covering me, and Dave is my teammate, and he makes a cut backdoor because he's being denied. For me, the hard part is not dribbling. The hard part is not pivoting. The hard part is actually not shooting the ball. The hard part is making a decision while you're doing those biomechanical things, right? While you're doing a technique. The technique is the dribbling. Okay, I can figure out dribbling, and most kids can figure out dribbling if they want to. They've got to put work into it. Don't get me wrong. They got to put work into it. This doesn't happen in the absence of work. But the main part for me as a coach and as a parent is, how can I incorporate this scanning, which causes them to be able to perceive things, whether it's distracting information or visual stimuli in their environment? I want them to be able to see while they're dribbling. And, the eyes in the back of the head analogy that like we say, oh, the great passer has eyes in the back of the head. What they're essentially saying is that that player is really exceptional at being able to scan their environment and attune to what is important versus what is not important. And that's such a key part of this, is to be able to go. And you can only certainly learn that through experience, being in those situations. And that's why I say situational basketball, constraints-led approach to basketball, games approach, whatever word you want to use. Those are so important because we're giving them experiences that transfer information over to the game. So a simple thing, and I've got examples, Basketball Immersion, YouTube, you can search scanning, and basketballimmersion.com. I've got a scanning article on there too, which explains it, and has some demonstrations with my daughter where basically she won't shoot a ball without having some distracting information or visual stimuli in her environment. That could be the simple basketball decision training, BDT, where I pass it to Duff, and if my hands are out in front of me, he has to pass it back, and then I pass it back to him. He's got to scan for me before he shoots the ball. So what does that do essentially? Well, that takes your eyes off the rim. And a lot of our practice now, whether it's dribbling, shooting, passing, you're just focused on your target. You're just focused on the exact thing that you're doing. Well, as we know, the hard part is not shooting a layup, is it? The hard part is shooting a layup while you're distracted by other things. And if you shoot a layup on air, and you can go do this on your own, coaches or players or parents, go do this on your own. Go shoot a layup on air with nothing in your environment. All you're going to focus on is your target. Well, of course, you're going to make the layup probably more likely. And then coaches are always like, oh, we never make layups in games, but we make them in every practice. Well, because in practice, you're doing them with no distracting information. There's no perception. There's no decision. So just by putting someone in their space, even if it's the threat, I'm just standing there. Dave's driving in for a layup. I'm just standing at the charge circle. Sometimes I step towards them. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I step backwards. Sometimes I step forwards. It's just literally putting something in their visual gaze that they have to account for prior to the technique being applied. And that's scanning. And we could go down that rabbit hole for another half hour, but go check out that article because that'll explain it more, coaches.
It's a fantastic concept. And I mean, I think Duff and I and many other high school coaches will say, like, if teams could just make layups, that would be such a step change in performance and results, right? I mean, kids miss a lot of layups because I think, Chris, to your point earlier, by the way, you're speaking, it's close to our heart when you talk about kids don't play pickup anymore. We've bemoaned that fact for years, but they're dribbling around cones, they're doing skills training, but it's not game-like. And so then they go in a game and they can make 100 layups in a row, but in a game, they're bricking everything because they're not used to these other externalities, right? And so drilling that is so critically important.
Yeah, and for the advice for parents, I mean, coaches to a certain extent, but trainers especially. Look, you can just add a guided. It doesn't have to be live defense. Like I can't move my feet and play like real defense on my daughters anymore, but I can simulate somewhat of the distracting information for sure. And the different types of visual things in their gaze. But man, anytime you can add a defender, and that's really the simplest advice for any. If it's a 5-on-0 drill, add one defender and it changes the perception of every player and it makes everything more representative. Maybe 5-on-3 is better. The advantage is still the offense. They can still run your beautiful pattern, but they've got things in the environment they have to account for. And that's how we can kind of marry these concepts of old school and new school. Okay, 5-on-0, fine. I'm not a 5-on-0 coach. I'll just go here quickly. I'm not a 5-on-0 coach for sure.
Yeah.
But I'm a whole part only if I need it type of coach. So I'm doing holes. Parts, sure, but only if I need it. I'm not predetermining I'm going whole, part, whole, and I'm certainly never going part, whole, part. So whole. But here's the thing. There's nothing wrong with 5-on-0. After you've done the 5-on-5 and you see, okay, they're really having a hard time with the pattern. They can't follow the pattern. Good. Then we want to remove some of that decision fatigue, go memorize the pattern, and then come back and reconnect it back to the game. To me, 5-on-0 is not the solution. It's part of the solution, but the real solution is being able to obviously make a decision in the context of the pattern within the game situation.
Yeah, along those points, Coach. Yeah, so scanning with the ball is one skill, but there's also the scanning for space off the ball. And I've heard the quote that skill is interaction with space when you're playing the game of basketball, and that of course there's a lot of emphasis on skill with the ball now, but there's not as much emphasis on skill in space. How do you use film, whether it's the film of your practices or games, or just watching games to teach interaction with space? Is that something that you advocate?
Yes. So principles of play for us, space, advantage, and shot selection, bronze, silver, and gold. And you probably heard that in some context, but space is always the answer. So any kid that I coach in the first 5 minutes of practice, they will know that the answer to every question in basketball is space. So that's number one. We want to connect it on the floor. Space is the most important thing. We're trying to seek space on offense and we're trying to create space on offense. And on defense, we're trying to do the opposite. And basketball is a game of opposites. So we're trying to take away the space. So that fundamental principle and them understanding that in a basketball practice helps me be able to highlight things in film. Because now when they're watching film, they know space is the answer. We can freeze it and say, okay, where's the space? Okay, where should we have, if it's defense, where should we have forced the ball so the offense had no space? And it's really that simple. And really, I don't know if players need that much more prepubescence in basketball than understanding that concept on offense and defense. Forget about your system. I'm not saying don't run a system, but I'm saying the system's not the power. The power is the player understanding the advantage relative to space or the disadvantage relative to space. So we would send one clip. Like that's enough. And then have a freeze frame at some point on the clip and ask a question. And then players usually, again, they won't necessarily respond, especially if it's prepubescence. But at the end of the day, then I can come to practice and say, hey, did you watch that clip? Right. And have a mini conversation or a bigger conversation. If we do film together, which I know at like a lot of levels, it's really hard to do film together. you don't have enough time or you don't have enough resources to do that. But if we ever did film together, it would be a similar process, maybe five clips at most for that age. And then it would be literally just things, freeze, hold, and then, hey, ask a question. Anytime you can bring film to life much more powerfully by using questions.
Love that. That's great. That's really good.
Awesome. Chris, you've been very at the forefront of the small-sided game revolution, right? And we've to some degree, we've all used small-sided games, whether it's 3-on-3 cutthroat or shell drill, whatever it is. But really, through your podcast and Alex Sarama and all the groups that you bring in, they're fantastic, and we use them all the time. Do you find that, so over the course of a season, let's say, does it make sense to repeat the same small-sided games, or do you try to mix it up and bring new ones? Because I find that I go back to the same, advantage drill, ball, defender on the hip, start out of that, and then play, or a 4-on-3 or whatever it is. Should we mix it up, or should we use the same drills consistently and see that way we can track the progress? I'm curious what your perspective is on that.
So I'm a big proponent of platform drills, meaning that you probably only need, like in a season, probably I only have 9 drills, like 9 games or 9 small side games. And it's an arbitrary number. Don't think you need 9 or 6 or 7. It's an arbitrary number. I'm just saying. So here's the main reason to answer your question. Players have a limited cognitive capacity. So we think about them relative to physical effort. They have a limited ability to, endure different physical activities within a practice, or they're going to get tired. It's the same thing when it comes to cognitive effort, right? If I have so many different drills that they have to spend time learning these different drills, or I have to spend time teaching these different drills, then I'm taking away from the most important part of basketball practice, which is learning time. I want them to have active learning time, meaning they're physically practicing, they've learned by doing, and I want to maximize that. I don't want to, if I have all this management time and teaching time, organizing drills and teaching new drills, then they're going to lose learning time by physically practicing. So that's number one. The number 2 kind of thing relative to platform drills and what you just said is, if you learn a constraints-led approach, then what you learn, and by the way, it's a fancy word, but most coaches use constraints. Constraints are things like, a scoring system, a spacing restriction, a dribble restriction. It's far more complex than that. Must finish with your weak hand.
Right.
We can go deeper, but if you understand this, then you can use the same drill every day and just manipulate the constraints. Let's give me a simple example. I just had this question with Nike and the NBA, kind of discussing this philosophy relative to marrying it with what's always been done. And by the way, if we were in the medical profession, we wouldn't even be worrying about what was done 20 years ago, would we? Like, what are we doing in coaching where it matters so much what we did 20 years ago? Would you want your doctor to be doing things the way they did it 20 years ago? Like, this makes no sense to me. And this stuff is well-founded and well-researched, not by me, much smarter people than me. And then it's experientially been used by many people. But to play basketball and get better at basketball by playing basketball does work. It does work. Nobody has ever shown me a study that 3-man weave helps a player get better at basketball. And that's what's ironic about all this. Yeah. But again, we hold on to this. Oh, well, my doctor, cures me with some, ancient herb and something like that he used 30 years ago. Well, no. What's new? What's new? Like, let's use it. And that's really the part that comes with it. So for a platform drill, if I just learn how to manipulate the constraints, that example of the drill we just started with and you just talked about, okay, the defender can start behind. The defender can start on the side. The defender can start sandwiched by 2 defenders. So it's really 3-on-3, but there's a defender on each side. You can start with 1 defender in front, 1 defender on the side. And now the player has to seek and find space relative to that advantage. We can start with a defender far away. We can start with a defender close. We can start with the help side tight together. We can start with the help side behind the weak side. Literally, you can manipulate so many different things. But I'll give you the example the NBA and Nike were talking about. This 3-on-2 traditional drill, right? 3-on-2, 2-on-1, all done it. The problem is if you do it every day, they get used to that, right? They get used to that. And that's the thing. I mean, that's just memorization. They know the solution. So instead, what we want to do is think about what can you manipulate in that drill to change it every day? Well, how about the 2 lines start on the same side? How about they start with no lines and they have to figure out where to go in space? How about we start with an extra person on the court, like a coach? Anytime the coach puts up their hands, they got to pass to the coach, and that initiates another trigger of a situation. Like, think about ways that you can mess with the game. And that's why I love constraints-led approach to coaching, because essentially I'm just trying to figure out every day, how can I mess with it to make my players uncomfortable, to get them comfortable again? And that's really the power of coaching. I want to make players uncomfortable and then make them comfortable again. And once they get comfortable again, what do I want to do? Make them uncomfortable again. And that's really the whole point. But hey, I know we're all fighting this. Parents, all they really value is that their kid feels comfortable. And we've got to get beyond that, right? We've got to, and it's not just parents. I mean, it's coaches too, to a certain extent.
Sure.
If it looks clean, if it looks perfect, then it's great. No, we got to be okay with the mess. We got to be okay with the chaos. And we got to be okay with kids being uncomfortable and learning how to cope and figure things out. And that's part of this whole platform drill process.
Coach, what about with constraints? Do you ever take the individual player into account? For example, if they're a kid that doesn't have a lot of confidence, and if you're throwing too many constraints at them and they're struggling, you back off and go back to comfort for a little bit? And how would you break that up in a team so that some kids are getting more constraints or others, or is that just too complicated to be workable?
No, the law of biological individuality applies for sure. So you're nailing it. It's like, I do believe that this constraint-led approach or a games approach helps us account for individual differences much more. They're not all the same. And you probably heard me say this, but they can't all eat at the buffet the same way, right? You know, Duff, you can only have salad. David can have salad and pasta. But you know what? I get the whole buffet. And I don't feel bad saying that to parents or to kids, because at the end of the day, the best player is probably the one that's worked the hardest on their game. They've become technically probably skillful because they've worked at their game, whether it's with a trainer, by themselves, something like that. So those players have more solutions. And that's ultimately what we want for players, is that they have more solutions. And solutions, this comes back to what you said, Duff, confidence comes from permission and freedom, right? And who's going to be the most confident kid is the one that has the most solutions. They have solutions to problems because they're skillful. So we want to connect those two things to them. But then we don't want to treat everyone the same within a drill. So yeah, if a kid is really struggling with something, let's say I'm doing BDT shooting, hands up, hands down, players struggling with it, I can always go to comfort and confidence reps, which is, hey, go stand at 15 feet. Let's shoot block shots, 5 in a row, make 5 in a row. Look, you're a good shooter. Yeah, of course you're going to shoot worse when there's other things around. That's what happens. You know, so connecting those things back and forth for the player. And also, you know, to your question, it's like, what can I notice that they're doing better? Look, we tend to celebrate as coaches, as people, as humans, only the final achievement. How come we're not celebrating the point when a really crappy kid gets less crappy, right? Like, isn't that an important step to be able to celebrate for that kid and say, hey, you were really bad. You were dribbling off your foot for the last week. And now look at you. You're not dribbling off your foot anymore. That's a huge achievement, but we only tend to celebrate the best player winning or the team winning or something like that. So celebrate all those small moments along the way and help that kid understand that where they're at is normal and they can get better if they work at it. And that's the thing. In the absence of work, you're not getting better. But if you work at it, you're going to get better.
Chris, have you found any of this stuff varies depending on if you're coaching boys versus girls?
I truly haven't found that different. You know, and I know there's individual differences and there's differences in terms of kind of maybe communication or maybe kind of the vibe of different things. But to be honest, I find this with girls as much as boys. They just want to get better. They just want to get better at basketball. Yeah. If they're at basketball practice, they want to get better at basketball. So to me, it really does connect with them that if I think about what fun is for that player, I think about that they want to get better and they want to be in an environment where they feel safe. And they want to be in an environment where they feel connected to the group. So belonging. So I'd say that's like universal, that every person on the planet wants to feel like they belong. So I'm happy you're here. You know, I look forward to coaching you. You belong. You belong. You know, and that type of thing. So I think if you account for those three things, then the individual differences or the differences in boys and girls, they really aren't as big as we think. I mean, certainly, yeah. Sometimes. And I think this is more culturally how some girls are coached relative to boys. And I've coached a lot of girls having 2 daughters, so I've seen it.
Yeah.
A lot of people that coach girls love coaching girls because girls listen. The problem is girls listen, right? When you're coaching boys, they sometimes don't listen. And that's absolutely good because sometimes they just go make a friggin' play.
Right.
Right? because they don't listen. And girls need more of that. Boys maybe need a little bit more of the listening, but if we find those balances, and generally I can connect that for players and get them to say, hey, sometimes, hey, I know I told you to do this, but you know what? You got a chance to go make a play, and kind of empower girls and give them freedom and permission.
It's a great segue. And Chris, basically, this is just a therapy session for me as a coach, so I appreciate you. I'll send you some Venmo. In-game coaching.
Yep.
So you see some coaches are storming up and down the sidelines and nonstop chatter. Some coaches are sitting down and they're letting their kids play.
Yep.
Where do you fall on is too much verbal in the game? Coaches who overtalk, I would put myself in that category. How detrimental is that to the kids, do you think?
Okay, so there are some differences. Like high school, you have more touch points with them. So as the season goes on, probably you would think about like restricting your in-game feedback as the season goes on. But, in club basketball, to be honest, like you practice so little that sometimes you've got to treat the games as the practices. And you're going to give a little bit more feedback from the sidelines. Yeah. But here's the thing. Certainly it should never be demeaning. It should be focused on things that actually help players.
Right.
And I'll give you a quick example. Like if I'm yelling at Duff in the game, I'm going, make your layup, set a better screen. Like, it's like, okay, well, he's not trying to miss a layup, right? Like, it's like, make your layup. Okay, great feedback. Thanks, coach. Like, really, I should try and make my layup. We know that. So it's more like, what is the feedback that I can give him in that moment? And I can say, hey, make sure you jump stop and hold your position when you set a screen. That's setting a better screen. Right? Ultimately, it's not your screen. It's the player using your screen that makes a difference, but you need to be a better statue. So giving them feedback like, hey, Duff, like on your layup, hey, you didn't find an open window. Like you shot a contested shot because you didn't take one more dribble to the open space, to the open window. Like giving them feedback like that is cool because again, we only have so many touch points with them, but we do want to caution it and certainly caution parents. And I would encourage you to have this conversation with parents in some context. Understand as a parent, and I'm talking to parents, and I'm one of them, and I do this still, but it's hard to say, shoot the ball, pass the ball, dribble the ball. Like that's parent feedback on the sideline. Shoot it, pass it, drive it. Well, when you say that, you actually take away decisions for your player, meaning your son or daughter is not developing. They're just regurgitating what you're telling them. So when you take away decisions, you're taking away parts of their development. So I would encourage us all to be quieter and support the things that we can support, mainly around principles of play, which I would educate parents about as well, is what are our principles of play? And if my parents on the sideline were saying, hey, silver medal, gold medal, and those things, then I think we'd be better off for it.
Coach, what about coaching effort from the sidelines? And I ask this because teams that I've coached over the years, many of them, we've tried to play fast and we want our wings sprinting to the corners, to get to the corners, to open up the space, just as we talked about earlier, because space is at a premium. And on defense, we want them pressuring up on the ball, and it just slips a lot. And kids are not sprinting to the corner. So I find myself a lot yelling sprint, and I find myself yelling a lot pressure, but the results are pretty mixed. And I feel like probably I'm yelling it too much because it drowns out, and then they're not processing it the same way. How do you get at effort in the game?
Well, here's the biggest thing for me is, and you can hear Rick Carlisle on the sidelines. You probably heard him saying pace, pace, pace.
Yeah.
Like he's come up with a color word. So I would come up with a color word that your team knows and your team identifies with, whatever that may be. We want to find something that's like beyond just a simple word and becomes our word. So that helps them identify more with the reality of what you're trying to say, rather than just faster, play harder, etc. Like, let's come up with something. So particularly your example of running wings hard. Number one, do you notice and normalize when they do it? Right? Because we tend to only notice when they don't do it. So are we supporting it? Or are we reinforcing it when they're doing it? That to me is really the biggest part of it. And I'm not saying only positive feedback. I'm not that guy either. Like sometimes we got to kind of push them a little bit and challenge them. As I said, make them a little uncomfortable because they got to learn how to cope with things. But at the end of the day, it's like, how often in practice are we noticing when they do it right? And something good happened because of it. Because the thing that is really hard for a player, especially we know the voices in their head outside of your practices, is like, oh, you got to get the ball. Why aren't you touching the ball? You got to shoot the ball, all these different things. And it's like, wait a minute, that big that sets a ball screen and rolls to the rim and doesn't touch the ball, but drew the weak side defender and then we skip it. I mean, that's an elite play, but we only focus on the pass and the shot. Well, how about the player that made the whole play happen by taking space away from the defense? So those different things. And that's where I would really say is like, try and find a way to be able to notice and normalize those things that kind of help your team that don't get noticed by others. And then I would actually have a session with parents, could be pre-practice, pre-game, something like that. Might be 10 minutes only, but just highlight those things and use names of players if you can and say, hey, listen, I want you to know, I really noticed this. I noticed Dave is running his wing hard every time. So everyone watch him run his wing. And the players can be in it so they know that you're talking about Dave, because I'm not talking about Duff. I'm talking about Dave. You know, it's like these generalities kill development. Like, oh, we all got to rebound the ball. Let's rebound better. I'm sure. Okay. But what I really mean is, Duff, go get a damn rebound. Right? Like, so let's be more specific in a safe way. And the other part of that is explain to them what coaching means. Like, I think we've lost that. What does coaching mean? Coaching means, can I tell you that you can be better? And I'm going to help you try and be better. That's what coaching is. I'm here to help you be better. And that's the thing. I think everyone just wants to be a shiny object. And maybe that comes back to that kind of youth piece a little bit more, that, you know, there's so many options. People can jump from team to team. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying the biggest problem is everyone thinks their kid is a shiny object. So they jump from team to team and then they never really develop because they're never in a situation where someone can actually coach them.
Coach, you've had exposure to so many great coaches, and you've talked about so many different, the game has evolved obviously over time from back when we were all playing. We're all roughly the same age. When we were playing, 5-out wasn't as prevalent back in the day. Now it seems like everybody's running some sort of 5-out action. Are there offensive actions that you really like today, like even within the 5-out framework, that you find are really effective that you would coach your kids?
Yes, absolutely. Number one, I feel like I need to go on a tour as the anti-5-out coach now. Because here's the problem.
Yeah.
5-out is a spacing template. 5-out is not an offense. And the problem with 5-out is that there's no gaps, right? So there's literally no space. And I see this all the time, like
Amen.
The traditional pass and cut 5-out. Well, all we're doing all the time is literally taking away each other's space.
Yep.
Like, you are being an extra defender, because when you're cutting and you're getting out to space, usually you're just filling a space that's a space. And we don't want to fill that space because we want that space. Anyways, it's a whole thing. But to me, if you are 5-out, then you want to create advantages somehow. You want to trigger advantages. So we tend to have distorted spacing. So the 2-side fast break, if you don't know it, you can go Google it. Basketball Immersion, the originators of it. Don't look at all those other copies of it. But the 2-side concept is literally we fill corner in a 45, weak side, say corner in 45, and let's say ball side, we're corner in 45. But then that top player is not filling the top. We want them off center. And if anything, we want imperfect spacing on the other side of the floor, so we have better spacing on what's going to be the ball side of the floor.
Right.
Yeah. So you think about those situations and you think about that, even running a high ball screen. How many teams are running a high ball screen and they run it right in the dead center? Well, how about just run it slightly off center? And that distorts the help, right? Think about different things like that. How can you manipulate space? And if you're thinking about that, then you're creating it. So to answer your question, I posted this edit because I did it with Columbus High School. The NBA sent me there to run a practice takeover. So for 2 days of practice, I got to run practices for the Boozers and all the different group that won the Geico National Championship. And literally that's what we did. We put in this wide action, which is a pass screen away. So we create a gap and we play out of that. Or we run a knife action. They called it knife. I call it a cross, where it's I pass and instead of cutting the rim, I cut across the face of the ball and I create a double gap quicker. The problem with the cut to the rim is it takes too long to empty space, right? Now, I'm not saying don't cut to the rim, but I'm saying those aren't the primary actions to be able to create advantage. Those might be actions after the fact to be able to react. Like a cut to the rim is more of a reaction versus defense than it is a primary action, just because it takes so long. So I would encourage coaches to check those two things out. The 2-side connects with wide. It connects with what I call gets, quicks, which is get action and different things like that, because essentially what it means is we're changing the shape constantly. We don't want one shape. And it's just like we said with small-sided games. We don't want to play the same small-sided game every day. We can play the same small-sided game every day, but change the shape of the small-sided game. And then it's essentially for kids, it seems like a completely different drill. Even though they know it, it's a different thing. And that's what we want.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Go ahead, Duff. Sorry.
Yeah, Coach, we had a coaching text chain over the last few days where we're looking at the Memphis Grizzly offense from this year. One of the sets they ran 4 out, 1 in, and the basic principle of wherever the dribble went, everyone just moved in a wheel in the same direction. So if the dribbler is going right, everyone moves right, and just filling the space. And to me, that's like the old push-pull principles you teach like in 4th grade. But Draymond Green called this offense quote unquote weird because I guess in the NBA we're so used to having shooters in the corner and not having the movement. And I just found that to be like pretty hysterical that, ancient principles of basketball move that now are becoming like novel in the NBA. Have you been following this at all? Do you have any take on sort of, how offense in the NBA is just distorted compared to the rest of the basketball world?
Well, I mean, number one, kudos to the Grizzlies for trying something different. Like again, I think people always think the NBA is just like, oh, everyone plays the same. And we know that. That's not true. If you're a basketball coach, you know that's not true. There are differences in how they play and how they react. And as you said, those different variations. But sure, I mean, basically push-pull. I drive left, everyone goes left. But what I understand about a lot of it, that what supersedes anything is if you're in the corner. Like the corner is the corner. The corner is not part of the spacing often because there's nowhere to go. But I am fascinated by that. I'm fascinated by kind of the exploration of these different types of ways to be able to kind of hunt matchups that happen all the time in the NBA, which don't apply to younger levels, obviously, as much. But they do a little bit in the sense that we can think about playing basketball relative to, okay, now I've got a turtle on me. That means I've got someone who's super slow on me. Then I want to be able to understand that as a player and I want to be able to attack them. And if I have a mouse on me, then I want to be able to take them into the post and play in the post. So we can kind of like think about some of the things that happen in the NBA in the same context. But relative to that spacing reaction, I think I've been through so many iterations with different teams I've even worked with, like at the college or NBA level and stuff like that, from, a drive on the weak side. And then are we cutting the 45 or are we cutting the corner? And that evolution of that, like I think a lot more teams now are cutting the corner because that cut and corner, that corner drift, the corner cut and the corner drift is such a powerful thing. So, I love it. I love hearing about it. I love learning it. You've got to figure out what works and what works not for you, but what works for your kids in terms of how simple is it? And if it's simple, then it's probably going to be more effective. And that's really what I come back to with penetration reaction. Is it simple and the kids can understand it?
So, Chris, we're a Bay Area podcast, right? So we're obviously biased for the Warriors. I've also benefited greatly the last 10 years from just beautiful basketball. And I saw a clip recently of Kerr talking. He was talking to Tom Tolbert, and he was basically saying that, the Warriors offense really is kind of a marriage of the triangle from Phil, which Kerr obviously learned, and Pop's, San Antonio motion, right? So you kind of meld those two things together, and that's where you get the beautiful split action, the corner splits, the ball movement. Discuss for our Bay Area fans here, discuss your perspective on the Warriors and their offensive actions.
Well, again, tremendous team to watch. I mean, if you do want to notice differences, then how they play is different. I mean, the thing is, it's triggered by an elite player that can move off the ball and shoot the ball, obviously, with Steph Curry. So that's number one. Number two, I do want coaches to know this because the copy and paste method of coaching, like I hope we're beyond that. Like it just doesn't exist anymore. Like I'm sure Duff in your text group there, it's like there's hundreds of different ideas and you have to take the 2 or 3 that work within what you're doing. It's not copy this system and do this system. That doesn't exist. And that used to exist, right? I mean, we can think back to, you ran Dean Smith's system or we ran like Jerry Williams flex or, whatever it is. And I'm not saying that's wrong, but I'm saying now players, they're so good. Like they really are so much better than we ever were. Like especially technique wise, the individual shot creation, the individual dribbling creation, those different things. So if you can find a way to be able to create a principle of play system for them to be able to explore space within that, then they're going to be more effective. And to me, that's what Kerr's done. And let's just be honest, why is it not a copy and paste system? Because where it was 10 years ago is not where it is now. It's evolved because those players have played consistently in that system. Like you think about the consistency with, I mean, Clay left obviously, but with Clay, Draymond, Curry, and these dudes that have played in multiple years in this system, they've figured out things and done things that Kerr never taught before. And that's credit to Kerr, that this system now has evolved to the point that I'm sure every game they do things or do something that they've never done before. To me, that's basketball brilliance and that's basketball beauty. And I mean, I know you want a championship, but I'm just saying, like, to all fans of Golden State, just enjoy every moment of watching this basketball. Because, you know, truly when Curry and Green are gone, the system will probably not be the same. And you'll be watching a little bit more generic basketball for sure, because this system is so unique to the players. And it's not just because of their technique, it's because of the decision making. Like the decisions that those guys can make for each other and for their teammates is absolutely incredible. And isn't it fun? I mean, people can knock pods or different guys like that and say, oh, we could be better. Sure, they can be better. But you know what? Watching that guy and watching how he's developed in that system is pretty impressive and pretty beautiful to be able to watch. Because again, that's not like something he's ever done before. He came up through AAU, probably playing pretty traditional, watch someone drive, watch someone draw two and still shoot, you know. And he might have been that guy doing that. And then all of a sudden he had to learn how to play off the ball. And it's been fun to watch that. And I mean, they're always a must watch for me.
Awesome. So, Chris, you're talking to two guys right now who are assistant coaches at the high school level. How do you view the role of an assistant coach? What's the best approach as an assistant coach?
Well, the assistant coach for me is basically, again, we can all say it's an extension of the head coach or something like that. And I think that's true for sure. But I want an assistant coach that has a conviction in something or some things. To me, that makes it more powerful. Obviously, unified front when we talk to players and all that. But I don't want, and I think that's the best assistants I've ever had, are the ones that do believe in something a little bit different sometimes than me, because those are the ones that help us all get better. And I think that's really a huge part. And I would say, like, in some of my consulting roles with Division Ones, for example, my main relationship with the head coach is to be divergent, to be someone who can say, hey, listen, like, have you thought of this? Like, I know you're doing this, but what is this? Why are you doing this? And being a little divergent. And I love that aspect of coaching. If you were to ask me the one thing I miss the most about coaching, it's like sitting in the coach's office and just talking basketball, right? Just talking basketball. That there's nothing more pure than those moments, especially after a win. But, you know, those different things where you can just kind of be informal, enjoy those moments and really dive deep and talk about basketball and tell stories. So to me, I want someone who's a little bit divergent, but also can obviously both lead and follow. And I think that's really important for your coaching staff, to be able to have leaders on your coaching staff that can lead themselves, but also lead, that you can step back. And I would say that was one of the hardest things for me, never having a full-time assistant at the college level, is to get to the point where I could just step away from the main coaching. And if you can get an assistant coach to be able to be someone who can run drills, run activities, and empower them to do that, and give them, it's not going to happen right away, but give them chances to make mistakes and learn, then you're going to be better as a coach because you get a chance to observe more. The hardest thing being a head coach is that you're both observing and interacting. And those two things are really, really hard to be able to balance. So if I have someone that can run drills and do drills and be kind of engaged and go from there. The only other thing I'd say, like, this is advice maybe to assistants and to head coaches, is try and avoid stacking behaviors. There's nothing more frustrating for a player than when we stop practice and Dave makes a point and then Chris has a great point and he stacks it on top of that point that Dave just made because we stopped practice and now I want to have a chance to talk to, right? And I think head coaches do it more than assistants, but it's like, okay, like that's really hard to get away from, but it's like, try not to stack too much information. We stop it. It's one reason.
What about, that's a great point. Yeah. And I find myself having done that many times over the years. It's like, just shut up. Let's move on, you know, point made. How about the assistant coach in the game? And I just want to call out that you had a great episode. I'm not sure I don't recall which number, but one of your podcasts, you just went through a grab bag of questions that you'd received. And it was just Chris Oliver just answering questions. And one of them was this assistant coach question. And you had a great answer to it. But during the game as assistant coach, what are you, as an assistant coach, what's your approach? And if you were head coach, what would you want your assistant coach to do?
You know, it's such a fascinating thing. I mean, obviously, I want someone, and this may seem strange. It can't be all of them, but I want one assistant that's going to constantly bombard me with information, right? That I can process, and then we have an understanding that I'm going to ignore and not acknowledge most of it, but I'm hearing it all, right? I'm hearing it all. To me, that was always something, this stream of consciousness that really helped me. Even if it's sometimes obvious things, I wanted to turn to him and say, I know this. Of course I know this. But, it's like in these moments, like we don't, like, how many decisions does a player have to make in a game? Like, I have to make decisions as a coach in a similar fashion, but relative to 5 players on the floor, 5 opponents that are trying to actively stop us, and plus our bench, plus all the variables of the referees, plus all these different things. There's so many decisions in a game that I want to have someone that keeps me kind of flowing with a stream of consciousness with the most important things that I need to know about. And that's relative to mostly to time and score and substitutions, right? Time and score and substitutions. I watched an AAU tournament this weekend with shot clocks, and I mean, shot clocks aren't hard for the kids. Shot clocks are hard for coaching staffs. Like, I can't believe how many shot clock violations there are because literally nobody counts down the shot clock.
Yeah.
So we always have a designated, say, assistant coach for the shot clock. We always have a designated assistant coach for the substitutions. We want one contact point for that different thing. Later in my career, we actually ended up sitting in the middle of the bench. I've seen other people do that before, where our coaching staff sat in the middle of the bench, mainly because we were having a struggle. Like, we weren't having a great season. Like, I think we ended up getting 500, but we knew our talent was down. But I wanted the players to hear kind of the conversations a little bit more. And it helped keep our coaches more positive and less negative because we're sitting in the middle of the players. When we all sit at the front, like we could all kind of like bash things and be negative.
Right.
I was like, wait a minute, this doesn't seem to work. Like, let's sit in the middle so we're focused on solutions rather than problems. And then that would be the last part, which is, hey, I want assistants that are going to focus not on telling me the problems, but tell me possible solutions. This is all solution based. This isn't problem based. I think fans can identify problems, right? What fans can't identify is solutions. And that's where coaches, we have a power to be able to identify solutions. So let's focus on solution based coaching.
By the way, that's a great idea of sitting in the middle of the bench. That's really cool. We've talked about timeouts and delivering information in timeouts, and coaches tend to overcoach timeouts, right? And it's going to go in one ear and out the other, right? Players aren't going to process everything. So, I was given advice a while ago, just like come up with one thing. That was the old Greg Popovich thing. It's like, figure out one thing that you want your players to take away from this timeout. Do you agree with that? Or how would you recommend approaching timeouts?
No, I love that. I mean, I would say the number one thing is to give players space. Initially, like find something. And a sports psychologist a long time ago gave me basically a thought cue to this, which is basically a way to be able to grab attention. It's like, okay, give them about 15 seconds before I'm not just going to go right into the huddle, right? Let them have some space because whatever the mood is, they need some space. And then when I get to the huddle, I would kneel down or sit, whatever it was, whatever point in my career it was. And it was like, okay, listen up. So it was like a cue, an attention cue. And I taught them the cue and said, hey, listen, you can do whatever you want. You can drink water, blah, blah, blah. But when I say, okay, listen up, that means all eyes on me and let's focus on this. And then to your point, it was literally, might be 1 point on offense, 1 point on defense, depending on the team, right? Because some teams couldn't handle that. Just had a conversation with a coach basically saying, the ideal situation and difference between the pros and the college players is literally in the pros, you could diagram the play that they're going to run after they're on defense. So if your timeout is happening and you're on defense, you could talk about defense and diagram the play you're going to run on offense. And they said, like, the lower the level, the less likely you can do that. And that makes sense, right?
Right.
So because of their experience, they can do it. So think about that. One thing on offense, one thing on defense, and then have some type of thing as well, which brings their attention back to the fact that they can go back onto the floor or drop their focus. This may be an aside. I think one of the things we don't teach, like, we are so powerful as coaches on trying to get players to focus and concentrate. Like, I bet you I would hear that at practice as much as good job, let's go, concentrate, focus, those different things. Well, that's fine. Yeah, we want focus. We want concentration. But I think the number one way to get those things is to be able to tell players when they don't have to focus. Like, when do they not have to focus in a game? Because we cannot be focused 100% of the time. So like at the end of the timeout, as soon as we're out of the timeout, it's like, okay, this is a time to drop focus again. You can get water, you can do whatever you want, stare in the crowd, slowly walk out, focus on yourself, players on the bench, whatever, those type of things. Like when do you have to focus and when do you not have to focus, and then you'll have more focus.
So, Chris, we're coming up on an hour here. I want to be mindful of your time, but I do have to ask. So you've had an amazing number of guests on your podcast. I know you love them all equally. They're all like your children. Are there any that have stood out to you, either favorite episodes, favorite guests, favorite lessons? Just give us the greatest hits from your perspective on your podcast.
Well, I kind of have this standard, like the last podcast I did was my favorite podcast and it was the best learning and all that stuff. That, for me, if I want to think about the evolution of the podcast, when I had Ettore Messina on, that was a big highlight for me. Like that's us geeking out as basketball coaches and just thinking like who's one of the best clinicians in the world? And it's hand down. Like, I don't know if he's one of the best coaches in the world. That's not in the conversation I'm talking about right now. But in terms of like clinicians who give you like real authentic stuff and just detail after detail and make you think, like Messina's like genius level when it comes to that type of stuff. So when I got him to come on the podcast, that to me was like one of those moments where it's like, oh, okay, this is fun.
Yeah.
Now we got something going. Cause to me, it's like those different kind of layers of people that have come on the podcast and supported it. And I would say by and large, almost every person that comes on the podcast now has listened to the podcast, which is an incredible honor. But there's still occasionally one that hasn't really understand it. And I had a coach recently kind of like, after I paused at some certain point, just ask them if they're doing okay. And they said, this is officially the longest interview I've ever done. I said, you've never listened to the podcast, have you? So for me, like somewhat, I would say the guests too, like, Dusty May on the second time, Tobin Anderson on the second time after they had success in the tournament.
Totally.
Just tremendous to be able to get their kind of deep dive. Crutchfield, I would say, if you haven't listened to the Jim Crutchfield episodes, who is this guy? Why is he so good? It's amazing. And again, that was a huge get in a sense because Crutchfield doesn't do a lot of media, and it came about kind of in like this really weird circular way, which I know you guys running a podcast know that kind of these podcast guests kind of come weirdly sometimes, but it was like Stan Van Gundy and Crutchfield connected, and it was after Van Gundy did my podcast. So Crutchfield had heard he did my podcast. So when I reached out to Crutchfield, he knew that I had already had Van Gundy on. So he wasn't thinking, okay, this is just some random thing, which, still was, but
of course
it's amazing. And I'm like, whatever pushes you over, coach, I'm good to go. And then the second time was after they won the championship and went undefeated. And, those ones are special for me in a way because someone's willing to come back on and they know the value of the podcast. And, I won't tell you the episode, but I had an NBA assistant tell me that the podcast basically became part of their resume. So when they got interviewed for jobs, they got interviewed for head coaching jobs, it became a part of their resume that GMs or different types of people would listen to. And I thought that was pretty cool. And I think that's helped kind of frame it for people to say, hey, listen, you're on here just like I'm on here with you guys. Like ultimately I'm here to share, not sell, but I'm here selling myself and kind of the way that I'm doing things and the way that we're doing things. And just grateful for that. And, really appreciative anytime I get asked to be on a podcast like you guys asked.
Well, what I love about your show, Chris, is the variety of guests that you have. So like one that jumps out to me, Sue Phillips, right? Midi coach, one of the best high school coaches in the country, girls high school coach. And that episode really resonated with me. Like I still remember one of the things, I say this to my kids all the time. She talked about addressing mistakes and how she coaches mistakes when she was talking to you. And she said, like, if it's a mistake where it's a good decision, there's a backdoor cut and the pass is just a little bit too long or a little bit too high. It's the right decision. We embrace those mistakes. We love those mistakes. It's the mistakes of lack of effort or repeated, bad decisions. Those are the ones that we correct. I remember that from your podcast. So I love that you have a great representation of, college, high school, NBA, women, men. Just the variety of guests that you have is amazing. So that leads to this question. How do you choose who's on your podcast? You have this massive universe of coaches. So how do you come up with your choices on who you want to talk to?
People would be surprised. It's still hard to get guests. Like that's the thing. It's still like one of the biggest pieces is to kind of try and get guests. So mostly word of mouth and different things like that still lead to the guests. But for me, I have always valued balance, right? Like I'm very hyper aware of that. Maybe it's the Canadian in me that I'm like, it's not just, male college coaches that are good coaches.
Exactly.
Like it's every level of basketball, there's good coaches, but I've had to delineate a little bit. Generally, it's only head coaches college. I'll have NBA assistants or WNBA assistants, but college, generally I've stuck to head coaches only because there's so many assistants to choose from that I know would be a good job. So on the YouTube channel, we created the basketball coaching class to be able to give a platform to some of those coaches to be able to promote themselves a little bit and share. And that's been wonderful as well. But for the high school coaches, it's literally just been a question of connections. Like since I moved to California, I learned about Sue, and obviously it was like a no-brainer for me to be able to reach out to her. Like obviously incredible success and consistency of success. USA Basketball and everything good goes with it. So sometimes it's just learning about someone, and then sometimes it's obviously, we're running a business ultimately. Like you guys are running a podcast where you want people to listen. So I've got to somewhat be cognizant too of saying, the great coach in, let's say Texas that has no social media and has won 800 games. I mean, at the end of the day, sure, that's great, but I'm trying to get people to listen as well. So having the social media presence is another part of it that, we have to account for somewhat, that there'll be name recognition, there'll be people interested in listening and go from there. But I don't know about your metrics, but mine are still relative to, college basketball is king and America still is the number one demographic of listeners. But I think last I checked, it was like 107 places in the world, countries in the world have had people listen to the podcast. So that's kind of cool.
That's amazing. Your metrics are better than ours. Go ahead, Duff.
For now,
right.
Well, understanding it's not your primary market, but do you have other episodes with regards to high school coaches? And I had listened recently, someone sent me episode 350, which was with the Coach White of Pace Academy. I thought that was a great episode for high school coaches, in particular with aspects of high school coaching that are a bit different, like the dealing with the parents and figuring out an approach that works, which of course you have to do at other levels as well, but probably most intense at the high school and youth level.
Yeah, Sharman White was on. Andrew Moran, he's an assistant with the University of Miami now, but he was at Columbus, so I think it was 355. Joe Mentagna, who's at Blair Academy, 353. Trying to think who else. There's definitely been other ones, but honestly, my network was traditionally kind of with, I would say, more with high school coaches, with college coaches in terms of my network. And now it's expanded much more with high school coaches because of my work with the NBA and EYBL kind of platforms. So I've met a lot more of those high level coaches. Dave Rabibo, who at Harvard Westlake here in California, he was on the podcast too. That one was outstanding because he just talks about the Harvard Westlake way, so to speak. So there's another one. And then Scott Hardnock as a coach, he's a Basketball Immersion member. It's absolutely an outstanding episode, but he talked about that transition from kind of traditional coaching to the Basketball Immersion way, so to speak, episode 362. And he talks about applying Basketball Immersion principles. And, at the time, I wasn't sure that would resonate with people, but it's actually become a really popular episode because I think there's a lot of people like him that went through kind of this process of saying, ooh, maybe there is a better way, but I'm not really that comfortable yet with this better way. So what do I do along the way to get more comfortable before I go in? And I'm not saying anyone to go all in, but how can I pepper it in? How can I provide kind of value to my players with understanding this way without being all in yet, and kind of like shape that a little bit? So there's been some episodes like that, but there's a plan in the fall to have a few more and a bunch more high school coaches on as well that can kind of help be relatable. But I've actually got good feedback from college guys on some of the high school stuff as well, because coaching is coaching. And you guys know, I generally don't ask questions about recruiting. I don't ask NIL. I mean, sometimes we go there, but I don't need to know your players. I don't need to know all that. Let's talk basketball coaching and that type of thing.
Another great one that I loved, Coach, was when you had Lindy LaRocque on, UNLV coach. Who, I'm a Stanford guy. She played for Tara at Stanford, but one of the things that she said, I say this to my kids all the time. She was saying that we don't run offense to run offense. We run offense to score, right? And a lot of the times kids will focus on running the play. Who cares what the play is, right? Like let's score. I still remember that one. So listeners, go check out Chris's podcast. It's incredible. Chris, thank you so much for your time. We've reached crunch time. So this is the end of our interview, and we pepper you with rapid fire questions, and you got to just answer right off the cuff. All right. Are you ready?
Good luck to me.
Okay. Duff, we good with going crunch time? Okay. Chris, favorite coach of all time?
Let's go with Spoelstra.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Love Spo. All right. Favorite player of all time?
Well, I grew up with Magic, so we'll say Magic.
Okay.
That was the era that I grew up watching basketball.
Sub question. Favorite Canadian player of all time?
Well, Nash. Now Shea. Maybe not after last night.
So again, we're Bay Area guys. We saw Nash play at Santa Clara.
Yeah.
So, okay. How about the toughest player you ever played or coached against?
Anyone that Dave Smart coached at Carleton University. And if anyone knows Carleton, they were a dominant program in the history of Canadian basketball. And, Rob Smart, Aaron Dornkamp, Oswaldo Genti, just every game, there was something that we had to deal with from them. And it was not just the talent, but how they used the talent.
Awesome. Okay. We like to talk about gyms. Favorite gym you've ever coached in or played in?
Oh my gosh, that one's a good one. Where is I guess in Canada, again, a lot of these references in Canada wouldn't be as exciting to people.
That's okay.
But, my favorite gym to coach in was early in my coaching career, Queen's University, bad program traditionally. Mm-hmm. And we packed the gym for a game against Carleton at the time, was number 1 in the country. And it was just a moment where it was kind of that arrival moment where it was okay, we've done something cool here. And I encourage all coaches. I've said this many times to people as the playoffs started this year. It's hey, take a moment right before the game, look around, enjoy the moment, because you know what? This is what it's all about, is to be able to have these moments where you appreciate the fact that, hey, take a deep breath and take it in because you worked hard to get here. So enjoy a second of it before the madness begins. And that was that moment that I do remember. And it's not a really special gym. There was no fans on the one side, big bleachers on the other side, but just jammed and people kind of crawling over each other. It was really fun.
That's fantastic. All right. You're up 3, 7 seconds left. Are you fouling?
Yes. Because that's what the analytics tell me.
No hesitation on that one.
Unfortunately, I've dealt with that question way too much for people. And it's anything under 8. It's, basically the really smart people that I have these conversations with are all on board with fouling. And we could get into that forever. We could have a whole podcast on that.
We could. All right, Duff, I have a few more, but I want to give you a chance.
So 24-second shot clock, 26 seconds, let's say 27 seconds left in a quarter. Do you try and go 2 for 1?
No, it's got to be more in the 40s.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Most important question of the entire interview, Chris. Poutine, yes or no?
No, not for me. No.
Oh, I know.
Shocking.
How about a Caesar?
Yeah, not really even. I know. You talk Tim Hortons, maybe we'll be there, but no.
All right.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Chris, thank you so much for your time. Please, so tell our listeners, how do they find you? Plug whatever you want. How can people find you?
Well, I just love, coaches, don't hesitate. Don't let price be an object. Reach out to me if you want to learn and stimulate your coaching and investigate a better way. Just reach out to me. I got a promo code for any of your listeners that are interested in joining our Basketball Immersion community, basketballimmersion.com. 10,000 plus coaches around the world have joined over their lifetime. And, we've had NBA coaches on down to youth coaches. And, everyone leaves the community with a better understanding of how to be a better coach. And the best player development is coach development. So I'd love to have more people join and be involved in the community. And then otherwise from there, please, if something stood out from this episode, maybe Duff said it, maybe Dave said it, or I said it, but let's tag both of us on social media at B-Ball Immersion on Twitter or at Coach B-Ball Immersion on Instagram. Tag us and let's have a conversation. I'd love to share more and talk more with all of your listeners as well. So don't hesitate to tag us and let's communicate.
That's great. We'll put all this in the show notes and including promo code. So thank you, Coach.
And
appreciate
listeners,
thanks so much for having me on, guys.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Thanks for everything that you do for basketball. You always talk about sharing the game, and it's a beautiful thing. So really appreciate you.
You have made basketball smarter across the world. So you made us smarter, but you made the game of basketball smarter. So we really appreciate all your time and effort and expertise.
Humbled and grateful for any time I get to impact the game like that. So thank you guys. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Chris.